This is a
So recently, there was an earthquake in Turkey that basically, it wasn't just Turkey, it was Turkey and Syria that basically destroyed cities and so many people died. It's crazy. So this video is called How These Buildings Made Turkey-Syria's Earthquake So Deadly. So maybe it's the architecture and engineering of the buildings that contributed. I mean, if they're old buildings, like there's really nothing you can do about it, can it?
This is a building collapsing in Turkey hours after a series of earthquakes and aftershocks on February 6th. First, the bottom floor crumbled. Then,
Hmm.
the rest of the building came down on top of it in what's known as a pancake collapse.
Wait, isn't the pancake collapse peop, the way people destroy buildings? Like that's how they drop these high rises when they need to, what is the term? Demolish. Isn't that the way people demolish buildings? Because they have to drop straight down instead of drop sideways, because if they drop sideways, they're gonna hit other buildings. Isn't that how they? Isn't that how buildings are actually engineered to fall? I wonder.
Collapse. Thousands of buildings near the epicenter in southern Turkey and northern Syria tumbled straight down in a similar way.
Yeah,
The intensity of
I
the
thought that
earthquakes
was how
alone
it's
carried
supposed
the
to be.
potential for destruction,
It's almost an
but
eight.
it's the pancake collapses that have made this one of the deadliest disasters in
This
the
is
region.
true. This is true because the entire building just falls on you, and it falls so quick. That was like a three. That only looked like that only took like 3 seconds before it became like that. It's crazy. It's actually why I'm afraid of living in a condominium, because condominiums here in the Philippines tend to be high rises, and I am afraid that if that thing collapses, I am afraid of that thing collapsing, because I'm sure that if I am living there and if that thing collapses, I would be dead. Like if that so happens, if you're like living in a 30th floor or something, or like or higher, when the building starts collapsing, you just accept that you're dead at that point. Or you could have a parachute ready. Will a parachute deploy from from a 30th floor? I wonder. Probably not. There's probably not enough wind and momentum. Unless there is, then just bring a parachute, I guess. Can you imagine residents of condominiums? There's a fire extinguisher, and beside that, there's a parachute. Just in case. Just in case there's a fire, just in case the building collapses due to an earthquake.
Even a very well designed and well executed building would have suffered. This doesn't rule out that the building was free of defects.
How well buildings protected residents played a significant role in lives saved and lost.
Clearly, a lot of these buildings were not up to standard.
The death toll
Because they seem
continues to
so
climb
old.
as many
If they're not up to standards of today, of course they're not. Because those buildings are like 70 years old or something. Or at least they look like it.
victims are still stuck under the weight of the buildings. So, what is it about these buildings that has made this earthquake even more devastating?
Bro, everything's just falling the same way. It's crazy.
First, let's look at the larger region that's prone to severe earthquakes because of these two fault lines.
Oh
They
shit.
sit along tectonic plates that meet one another and cause friction. When the friction builds up,
And it
a powerful
constantly
earthquake is
moves.
eventually released. Over the last century, Turkey has seen major earthquakes along both fault lines. The most recent one happened here. This is the seismic impact that shows the epicenter.
I remember I saw a photo of a tree like in that spot. I'm not sure if it's that spot, but there was a tree in where due to that earthquake it got split in half, and then the other half moved 10 meters away, and there's a big gap of there's a big gap between them. Like there's a ravine. Is ravine the word I'm looking for? Between them. It's crazy.
When you take a closer look at the most impacted areas, they were densely populated with Syrian refugees who ended up living in buildings that were haphazardly built and largely neglected.
Oh.
And across the border in Syria, buildings in these areas were already weakened by the prolonged civil war.
Yeah,
But what
there
really
you go.
complicates this disaster is that Turkey was aware of the buildings that were the most high risk.
They
They're
knew?
called soft story structures.
It's in the name. It's soft. Why did they do that? Why would you make a building for people to live in that will just collapse?
A soft story building is typically a large structure with multiple floors and an open plan on the bottom. That
Okay.
bottom floor can
Sounds
sometimes
good.
be a parking garage, space for small businesses, or extra homes.
Yeah.
These buildings are very common throughout the world, especially in countries like India, Pakistan, and Turkey, because they
that's
offer
very
a solution to overcrowding
We have those things here as well.
in densely populated areas. But they historically do a poor job of withstanding medium to powerful earthquakes. Here's why. These columns here could be made of brittle concrete, and the stories on top might be made of stone and a stronger mix of concrete. Sometimes
It's because it's too heavy up top. Or the foundation is not well built.
the bottom floor has fewer walls than the ones above, with sides that may be left open, or columns that aren't connected by walls. This means that a soft story is the weakest floor and cannot fully support the heavier ones above it. So when an earthquake hits, the structure may shake until that bottom floor collapses. During powerful earthquakes like Turkey and Syria's, the remainder of the building may follow. This kind of collapse
I
traps
see.
people under heavy construction materials, making rescue missions even more difficult.
ابن عمي ومرته مع 3 اولاد لهلا ما معروف
I
عنهم
do
شيء
not know anything
ساكنين
about
بالثاني
that. Their
الفني
house is on the second
I
floor.
can't see him. I can't see him.
This is worse than war.
But this is a challenge Turkey has faced before. A comparable 7.6 earthquake hit
It's worse than war because there's nothing for you to fight. You can't fight the planet. You can't fight nature. If nature wants to wipe us out, we get wiped out. There's nothing we can do about it.
Izmit in 1999 and caused over 17,000 deaths. It became clear that poor building design and soft stories, which made up nearly 90% of building collapses, exacerbated the death toll in this disaster. The aftermath pushed the Turkish government
I feel like it's not just the style of building that it is, it's probably also poor construction materials used. I think. Maybe they built it just pure concrete. There's no steel like beams and bars within the walls that that hold it. I don't know. But damn, for so many people to die.
to reintroduce building codes with an emphasis on earthquake safety. But they weren't enforced due to corruption, and many buildings in Turkey were built well before 1999,
enforced.
which meant those buildings could only be
There it
strengthened
is.
retroactively.
There it is, it's old.
There is a way to keep soft story buildings intact in the event of an earthquake, retrofitting them with materials that can support the weight of the structure. In an ideal scenario, these columns can be replaced or reinforced with steel frames. These open
There it
walls
is.
can be reinforced too, and
There it
extra
is.
bolts and braces can be drilled into the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So if the structure shakes, there's support from that bottom floor. A
Yep.
solution like this seems simple, but it's extremely expensive to execute. According to
That's
the
a
World
lot of
Bank,
steel.
around 6.7 million residential buildings in Turkey need retrofitting or reconstruction at a cost of $465 billion. As of
It's a lot of
2021,
steel.
only about 4% of those buildings were transformed. In
Well-
fact, retrofitting is an expensive undertaking and nearly impossible even in countries like the US. Here is every remaining soft story
Just
building in San
rebuild.
Francisco that needs reinforcements that would cost billions. But another problem in Turkey is that construction companies
lot.
have been cutting corners and ignoring building codes for decades, and the Turkish government has let their violations slide. According to the BBC, this post advertised a
Because private companies would pay the government in order to get the job to build a building.
a building that complied with Turkey's latest earthquake safety regulations, which emphasizes the use of strong materials. But the way that same building collapsed suggests it was a soft story structure. Now,
Because it
Turkey is cracking
pancaked?
down on contractors that are allegedly responsible for these collapses.
They
The
should have
scale of
done
this
that
disaster
before.
is a result of complex factors, like geography, neighborhoods still reeling from war, and weak buildings. But what makes this moment particularly harrowing is that while earthquakes along fault lines are inevitable, many of these deaths didn't have to be. Turkey, along with other countries near fault lines, are all prone to intense earthquakes. But they won't
Look,
have
there's
to be
us.
this deadly if cities enforce
The
codes
Philippines.
and treat safe housing as a human right.
There's literally a fault line in one of the major cities in Metro Manila. Like, it's just literally sitting there on a fault line. But it is what it is. Like, what can you do? What can you do?
When an earthquake hits,
Like this, I learned something from this. I hope the victims in Turkey and Syria can bounce back. And I hope this is a lesson learned to governments of both countries, as well as their engineers and architects, to properly enforce their buildings. Because that's a lot of people dead.